This is a Puget Soundkeeper presentation. Hello, welcome everyone to our panel, Resilience in a Time of Crisis, a conversation on community action, clean water, and building healthy communities. I'm your host and moderator, Eloise Harris from Puget Soundkeeper. This event is presented as part of Puget Soundkeeper's week-long virtual Salute to the Sound celebration, which began on Monday and will wrap up tomorrow at our live virtual gala at 7 p.m. So if you haven't already, there's still time to RSVP via our website at pugetsoundkeeper.org. While the focus of our discussion is framed by events like the ongoing pandemic and the fires in our region that have clearly exacerbated the underlying inequities that leave people of color at higher risk of being exposed to toxic pollution in our waterways and communities, this panel also aims to highlight the transformational work and leadership that communities of color and communities that consistently live in the margins of our cities are doing to make their neighborhoods healthier, resilient, and ultimately safe for everyone. The people and organizations that are on the panel today not only work alongside Puget Soundkeeper in various coalitions and collaborations, but are folks that we turn to and are inspired by, especially in regards to what it means to be in solidarity with those who are on the front lines of environmental justice issues and impacts. To open, we are starting this gathering with a land acknowledgement. While all of us are calling in from different places throughout Puget Sound, we would like to acknowledge that we gather today on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin from time immemorial. And we acknowledge that we benefit from the prosperity of the United States, which was built on the labor of enslaved Black people. Please join us in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous neighbors, the Duwamish people, past and present, and other Coast Salish peoples for their enduring care and protection of these lands and waterways, and for the African-American descendants who built this country. While a land acknowledgement is not enough, it is an important social justice and decolonial practice that promotes Indigenous visibility and a reminder that we are on settled Indigenous land, much of which are unceded. Let this land acknowledgement be an opening for all of us to contemplate a way to join in decolonial and Indigenous movements for sovereignty, renewal, self-determination, and liberation. So before we start the panel discussion, I'd like to go over some quick housekeeping notes. First, if you haven't had a chance to email us questions, but you'd want us to cover tonight, we invite you to type in your questions in the QA tab at the bottom of your screen. We also invite you to introduce yourselves on our chat box by writing your first name and where you're tuning in from. While we are recording this meeting, please note that we are not displaying anyone's image or full names on the recording screen to ensure everyone's privacy and security, except for the panelists. But again, you're all invited to say hello via chat. And last, we do have a technical director who's managing our back-end logistics for this gathering. Kristen Holschbach, also from Puget Soundkeeper, is keeping watch over our chat to make sure that we don't miss anything. So now, to begin our panel discussion, I'd like to first introduce this year's Puget Soundkeeper Youth Award recipients, the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps. So we have Kelsey, who's an intern and works with Villa Comunitaria, where she teaches technology classes to Spanish-speaking and immigrant community members. And like Kelsey, Leilani is also an intern. She's the climate justice intern at the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition and is a freshman at Eastern Washington University. As part of the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps and as a program offered through the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, Leilani and Kelsey engage communities on intersecting issues, especially around water and air quality in South Seattle. I'd also like to welcome Senator Mona Doss from the 47th District, who is this year's Puget Soundkeeper Inspiration Award recipient. Within a short time, Senator Doss has made an indelible mark in Olympia because of her work on housing, transportation, equity, and environmental justice, and has demonstrated a deep commitment to racial justice and solidarity work by mentoring and supporting women of color to be in legislative roles. So first, I want to congratulate all of you again for being recognized as Clean Water Sheroes and as leaders. I know we did separate segments where we talked a bit more about the wonderful work you're all doing, which are videos that you can still check out on our Puget Soundkeeper socials and website. In these interviews, we talked about the challenges that communities of color are facing even before the pandemic and fires, and that these issues intersect between environmental justice, economic, and racial justice, among other issue areas. For example, if we talk about water quality, we also have to talk about the impacts on air quality and the language barriers and access issues involved in communicating these kinds of problems, but also in communicating what people need to do to breathe and fish safely. So there's a lot, going on there that has to be done, even if you're just focused on one particular issue. So what are some key solutions or approaches that you all have discovered in trying to address these kinds of intersectional issues? So if maybe Senator Doss, if you want to start off.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I am so honored to win this award. As I said to you earlier, Eloise, we don't do this work to win awards. We do this work because we're driven and passionate about these issues. I've been passionate about the environment ever since I moved to New Hampshire after college. And so to be able to do this work in the legislature is just such an honor. And I can talk to you about some of the bills that I'm excited about. Earlier this year, which I can't believe to say it was this year, it feels like 12 years ago, I passed a bill to ban the use of plastic bags in the state of Washington. We called it the Reusable Bag Act. And that's really intersectional, as we want to make sure that we don't continue to degrade our earth as well as our environment. We've all seen the photos of whales and wildlife that have eat these plastic bags and think they're jellyfish or whatever. And these whales end up dying because their bellies are full of plastic. So to be able to work on that legislation with my great counterpart, Representative Strom Peterson, to get this bill passed was such a great honor. This year I'm working on a bill called EPR, which is Extended Producer Responsibility. I've always been of the mind that if you can't be recycled, reused, or composted, it should never be created. I know I have a recycling bin full of recyclables, and then I have trash. So those plastic pieces, styrofoam, clamshells, to-go-ware, all of that stuff. If we had to mail this glass back to the manufacturer once I was done with it, I guarantee you they'd figure out a way to make it reusable, compostable, or recyclable. And that's what this bill does. It puts the responsibility back onto the producer to say, hey, stop making it, make something different. So I'm really excited about that bill and what it could do for our waterways and our environment and for our future generations.
And Leilani and Kelsey, what are some key solutions or approaches that you all at the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps have discovered in addressing these kinds of intersectional issues?
Well, with my organization, since a whole separate part from Leilani, I have been working with adult people, getting resources that they need, so helping them out in technology classes like Excel, Word, because since the kids are learning online, they are having trouble helping them out because they don't understand what they have to do, so they just feel worthless because they can't help out their kids with their homework or on what to do. So I have been working on teaching them how to use the stores, or like also translating documents for them as well, like step by step on what they can do to help out their kids. And I also work with Villa Comunitaria as of, like, you can say I'm helping them out, send out messages to the people that we have registered for the immigrant fund that we had from Seattle. So I'm helping them build out their application for they can send that in, and hopefully they receive some money that they can need during the pandemic.
Yes, like Kelsey mentioned, translating and keeping the community informed is something that's very necessary. In the Duwamish Valley, not everyone knows English. We have a very diverse community, so it's very important that we are able to communicate with all of them and not leave anyone behind.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all that you're doing. So now I'd like to welcome and introduce our other panelists to join in the discussion. We have Jill Mangaliman, who is the executive director of Got Green, a grassroots organization led by people of color and low-income people. Jill has a wealth of experience as an organizer and strategist and was a part of the Climate Equity Task Force that released the King County Strategic Climate Action Plan in August, which outlines a 5-year roadmap to prepare the region for climate impacts, cut greenhouse gas emissions in half, and elevate the voices of frontline communities. Welcome, Jill. And we also have Marquise King Mason, who is a community organizer at Citizens for a Healthy Bay, an organization that aims to restore Commencement Bay in Tacoma and is a part of the Sunrise Movement, a youth movement to stop climate change and create green jobs in the process. In these roles, Marquise seeks to amplify the experience and expertise of historically underrepresented and marginalized groups within environmental movements for clean water and climate resilience. And we also have Bridget Ray, who's the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Na'a Ilahi Fund, an Indigenous women-led organization that does work to advance climate and gender justice through grant making, capacity building, and community-based intergenerational programming. Bridget serves on numerous boards, including the Washington Environmental Justice Task Force, and facilitates the Salish Seat Collective, a consortium of community-based organizations in the region focused on bridging clean water work with equity and social justice, of which Puget Soundkeeper is also a member. So thank you, Jill, Marquise, and Bridget for joining us as well. So based on the intros alone, it's clear that climate change and climate justice are issues that overlap with all of our organizations. For Washington State to truly be resilient in the face of climate change and to ensure that all communities are resilient, what must happen? So maybe Marquise and Bridget, if you wanna take this one and start us off.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, folks. Again, my name is Marquise King Mason. I use he, him pronouns. I'm here as myself, but I organize with Citizens for Healthy Bay and Sunrise Tacoma. So yeah, what has to happen for us to be truly resistant? I think like we got to buckle down, we got to do the work, and we got to invest in community. Like we have to make sure that our communities are prosperous, have the resources that they need, because we all know that communities of color and low-income communities are going to get hit first and worst by climate change. It's already happening. It's not like theoretical. It's here, mama, right? Like we have to recognize that there's a lot of strife going on right in our communities where they're not getting the resources they need. Folks have not believed in them. They've been passed over, whether it's business communities or developments or whatnot. Like a lot of communities are hurting and do not have the infrastructure needed to deal with the changing climate. And so I think we got to start those investments now. We got to have those folks in those communities they got to be steering the wheel, right? Like, what's that phrase? Like, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, right? And I really believe that. Like, we have to be there advocating for ourselves, right? Like, I live in Hilltop, Tacoma, and like we know that there's been disinvestment in this community for generations, and only we've seen investments since it's become gentrified, right? And that's just the reality of it. And that cannot be the case, right? We need to invest first, not last, because right, like we have urban heat issues, we have food deserts. There's so many things that are going on in a lot of our communities for what is a really prosperous state, right? Like Washington, we've got it on lock economically, but we need to actually give that back to the people now. And so I think, yeah, investments.
I love being paired up with Marquise because, yes, and buckle down and do the work is great. And if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. One of the sayings, so I'm Turtle Mountain Chippewa, but I grew up in this area among coastal people, and I go on the annual canoe journey. We've pulled through Commencement Bay and coming around the peninsula in a big dugout canoe with 16 people. We usually go pretty well, but when you come around into Commencement Bay, you can feel that the water is tired. You can actually feel the stress that that environment is under, which, you know, when you're connected and you are in communion with your place and the people around you, and that's a value of interconnectivity, I'd say you have to plug in. You have to actually be vulnerable and have the courage to lean on the people around you and to make connections, especially in this time when we're disconnected and we're so divided, that leaning on each other is an act of strength and courage. We are interrelated, and that communion helps us align and helps us to get things done. You know, doing the work is easier when we do it together and we're very transparent. And when we disagree, that we agree to have a conversation rather than a fight about disagreeing. That's, you know, we're not all going to agree on everything all the time. That's just the way it is, and that's what makes life colorful and interesting. And so the other thing is to know what the issues are, to participate in your community, and to take care of yourself so that other people don't have to take care of you. If you are responsible for your own carbon footprint, for your education and your personal authority on how you act in the environment and how you take care of yourself can sometimes be an act of revolution. If you've been sidelined, if you've been part of a community that doesn't have good health or that's been exposed to pollutants, taking care of yourself not only will make you stronger and help our communities to last, but that's part of being resilient, is making sure you're still around and that you offer people a strong hand to hold on to. So that's part of being, you know, of clarity. And you know, I did line out some notes today, but I think that I'll just add those at the end once everybody has a chance to speak. I'm very excited to be part of this group, and it's just wonderful to be able to exchange those words with you all. Miigwech.
I love that. I love that image of a canoe. So I used to paddle, originally from Hawaii. Spent a lot of time paddling, more so than surfing, because I would always fall off the board. But anyway, you know, it is about, you know, sort of this idea that we're all in this one big canoe, and it's harder to go anywhere if we're all paddling in different directions, right? So you got to figure out a way to move together. So I love that image. So I know that everyone here is involved in a lot of organizing work to ensure that Indigenous, poor, and Black and Brown communities are not left out of solutions and processes that governments and cities are facilitating, especially in preparation for 2021 and the legislative session that's coming up. So for Jill and Senator Doss, I know that there are specific things that you and your organizations have been rallying around to ensure that our waters and communities are safe and healthy. Can you talk a bit more about what efforts you're prioritizing in this moment? And are there specific actions that you're hoping community members can take? And on the flip side of that, are there things that people should be wary of and not support?
Hi, everyone. I can go first. Also note that my internet's connection is not very stable, so I'll do my best. I may have to take off my video, but at this time, Got Green is really concerned about, you know, we've learned, especially under COVID and under this pandemic, that communities of color and working class communities are even more at risk. And there are, like, it's what we've known all along, right? Living in the most polluted and having our health affected by environmental injustices actually puts us at higher risks and higher death tolls of COVID. And so it's what we've been concerned about, is how do we strengthen our communities? How do we push forward solutions from the people who are most impacted? And so one of the work that we were involved with is the Green New Deal we pushed for in Seattle. We really want to see our economy transition away from fossil fuels to eliminate climate pollution, and also to move towards, right, a regenerative economy that doesn't rely on digging, dumping, and burning in our communities, so that our health and our communities are strong and for future generations. We also really believe that we have to tackle this issue of displacement. The more people are being priced out of their communities or pushed out further and further away from their social safety nets, from the services they need, from their cultural hubs. Again, the least resilient they will be, the least be able to respond in times of crisis. And in COVID, we know that our people are feeling even more isolated right now. And who are the people who take care of us is our family, our friends, our community, are the first responders, are the people who are, showing the mutual aid and support systems we need in this time. We definitely also advocate for people's basic needs to be met. Utilities, there's a big campaign being led by Puget Sound Sage and Sierra Club to ensure no one gets their utilities shut off or go into debt for having for their utilities. No one should be able to freeze to death, right? In a winter, or to not have power so that they can have their medical equipment provided. And then also around rents, right? Like, we want to make sure people can stay in their homes, stay rooted. Things that we don't support. So, I mean, Gakrin, we're very supportive of like solutions that make our communities healthy and strong, and also like strengthen the self-determination and community power. Things that we don't support are things like carbon pricing or market-based solutions that put profit over people, that continue to pollute in our communities, that don't keep fossil fuels in the ground. We really see these as kind of like distractions, when we really should be making radical shifts to reducing pollution and transitioning the economy to a regenerative one. Yeah, and I'll just add one last thing. As someone who grew up in Seattle, by the West Seattle Bridge, by the steel factory, and now I live 5 minutes from the airport, right? My neighbors, myself, we're exposed to pollution every day, and I don't. That's not the kind of world that people should be living in, especially for communities of color. We deserve much more, and I think once we start really thinking about how it impacts us and our health and the people we love, like, we'll fight even harder. So I'll pass it on.
It's always hard to go after you, Jill. You're so brilliant. Thank you for sharing so deeply. I agree with everything Jill said. For me as a legislator, it's been, I'm not a groomed legislator, right? Nobody ever looked at me and said, you should run for office. In fact, nobody ever did. They say it takes 7 times for a woman to be asked to consider it. It takes 10 times for a person of color, specifically a woman of color, to be asked to consider it. And do you know how many times I was asked to run for office? 0. Nobody looked at me as an entrepreneur, as someone with an MBA, as a woman that's an immigrant with lived experience. No one ever looked at me and said, you'll be a great legislator. And so what happens when people like me show up at the legislature that wasn't built for me, wasn't built by me, it was not built with me in mind, and nobody like me was supposed to ever be there as a legislator. I mean, I don't know if y'all ever been there, and you walk down the wall, white man after 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 white man, until like 5 years ago, right? And so when people like me show up and we're loud and we're brown and we're proud and we don't back down, people do not know what to do with me. And I will tell you, my goal is to make sure I am not the last. As Marquise said, and I ran on this slogan, if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. I cannot tell you how many racist things have been said to me. And they say things like, well, we can't give those people money because then they'll just ask for more. Okay? Change those people to those corporations, and it's a whole different ball of wax. And so when we call corporate tax breaks, I call that corporate welfare. When we call subsidies for poor Black and brown people, that should be a tax break. And we need to flip the script. And I am tired of people of color and poor folks Black and brown and indigenous folks, we all know we're at the bottom of the ladder and we have got to stand up. So what I'm going to say to you is what you can do is show up. Keep showing up. Be parts of these organizations like Got Green and all these other organizations that are doing the work. Show up. Legislators like me, we need you. I'm going to tell you how I passed that plastic bag bill. Because I had the enviros, I had the labor community, I had the large grocers, the small grocers. We even had the chemical industry as part of our coalition. That's how we passed the bill. And that's how you pass bills and change laws. I'm going to also tell you one little tiny secret. Now that there are people that look like me in office, today, me and Representative Vandana Slatter and Senator Montgadingra, the three Indians, sat down with the Sikh and Indian cab drivers to find out how they are getting lost with COVID relief, CARES funding, all of that. And they got the meeting because we're part of that community. So I don't just represent the 47th district, which I'm very honored and proud to represent. I represent every Indian, every Black and brown person, every Native American person, every immigrant. I carry all of you with me when I go into those rooms where I'm one of only 4 women of color in the Senate. So keep showing up. We need you to figure out your purpose. We need you to figure out what makes you come alive. And then we need you to scream from the rooftops. Be silent no more.
I love that. Thank you so much, Senator Dawson. Thank you so much, Jill. Speaking of showing up, if you haven't already, everyone, please vote. Get your ballots in. You know, if anything that we've been talking about matters to you, absolutely cast your vote, make your voice count, make it be heard. So my plug for voting. And, you know, hearing, you know, Jill and Senator Doss, you know, talk about the importance of representation, the importance of leading with values, the importance of fighting for, you know, the communities that we live in. I immediately think about the importance of creating a culture that supports the organizing work that we're doing, right? Thinking of creative ways to amplify the issues and the solutions that are inspiring all this organizing work is critical. So for me, I draw a lot of inspiration from young people and youth organizers who are using storytelling strategies to engage and connect people of all ages. So for Leilani and Kelsey, what are some of the storytelling strategies that the Youth Corps is doing to engage people in the Duwamish Valley?
Well, something that we're doing, like I mentioned before, communication and including everyone is a key for our mission. So for like right now, we're doing a podcast about the climate justice and like local issues that are happening here in South Park or in the Duwamish Valley in order to keep the community informed. That way they can advocate for themselves, know what's going on, know what's entering.
It looks like we may have lost Leilani. You know, as we're talking about intersectional issues, the digital divide is a very real thing. Being able to connect is really largely, sadly, dependent on where you live, right? Is Kelsey there by chance?
Yes, I'm here.
Did you want to continue on or add on
Yes.
to what Leilani was talking about?
To add on to what Leilani was talking about, when I was in the Youth Corps, we used to create we used to do some youth forums where we would have people come in and we would have separate tables of informational, like of different topics, one about like trees, environment, the air quality, or like how we can prevent the air quality to come bad, like even worse for the kids that have asthma here in South Park. So that forum was for information towards the parents and for the kids to have that information, that to be prepared, like for the future references.
That's awesome. Because I've been monitoring your socials, and it's clear that you're all very and I've been monitoring not in preparation for this per se. I just love all the work that you've been doing since the pandemic. You know, it's so visual. I know that there is a comic strip that you folks are putting together that'll be talking about these issues as well, and in different languages. It's all really exciting, and it really inspires me to kind of figure out, you know, what are the things that we can do to communicate the issues that we're working on, so that everyone can be a part of those fights, but also part of those wins, right? So this question is open to everyone. And actually, before I ask it, I do want to invite, for those of you that are tuning in, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. So while you folks are doing that, the fights for equity, the importance of centering the expertise and knowledge of frontline people, which include Black, Brown, and Indigenous voices, isn't new for any of us here. I mean, we've been talking about how we've been doing that, right? Or how you all have been doing that. What also isn't new is the transformational work and the organizing that's existed long before the pandemic. So that's also clear in hearing you folks talk about the work you all have been doing. But that said, this reckoning that's been going on is opening up a lot of hearts and minds, especially non-people of color. For those that are wanting to be allies, what does it mean to center frontline expertise, and how does that look like?
I'll just kick it off. It's, if you're not brown, you know, like, and I feel like this is a good space for me to step forward. I'm a white presenting mixed Native woman, right? I have half my DNA makeup is from Irish and European and French descent, and then the other, you know, part is Native. So I got it from both sides, right? Internal racism and external, like, you don't look Native, or you are what, you know, it's ultimately up to you about how you feel. But each person has their own story and their own narrative, and know what it is and be authentic about it. Don't try and be something you're not. So my lived experience is different than my mother's lived experience, which is different than her mother's lived experience, right? But they pass down their lessons to us nonetheless. Like I'm not Native, right? But it comes up, and you got to be prepared to have that conversation. You got to be ready. And it is what it is. The other thing is, you know, if you have access to that kind of privilege, get out of the way. You know, if you have somebody who's brown next to you, has a lived experience, put them in the spotlight, give them your seat at the table if they can make more use out of it. Like, that's part of being solid, of being, you know, part of a group. Rather, it's not about you. Get out of the way. You know, it's about the work that we have to do. Because there is, you know, there's a lot of work. So I'll just kick it off with that.
Yeah, I can pick it up. What I would say is really helpful for allies to do is, or orgs to do, especially if you're a predominantly white-led org, like lean into that discomfort, right? Like, the world is uncomfortable. As a person of color, it ain't cushy for me. It can't be cushy for you either. And like, that's okay, right? Like, we're not here to do this work because it's pretty. We're not here to yell at the powerful because it's like our favorite thing to do, right? We're here to do this work because it's important, because we have future and past generations we need to make proud and allow survive. And so, like, as a white ally, or maybe someone who has other forms of privilege, I think it's really important for you to sit with that discomfort, like, and lean into it, right? Like, lean into like deep democracy work, lean into power sharing, lean into like your, as a board member, maybe you got to stop talking and you got to start letting your staff do their thing, right? There's a lot of things we can do. I mean, I love boards, like, full respect to boards. Boards are predominantly white, right? And that can be an issue, especially as organizers of color. Like, my board's great, but not every board is good, right? And so, like, really, if you have some of that positional power, like, share it out, give it back, lean into discomfort. You're going to be, right? Like, you're going to be in positions where you feel like things are changing, right? Like, oh, this isn't our mission, or, oh, we don't do racial justice work, or, oh, like, whatever, right? Like, we have to be aligning ourselves with the movements for justice. And that's not always comfortable. It's not always fun. It's soul crushing, to be honest, right? And I think we all know that as advocates in one way or another. I think like just like allowing ourselves to sit with this discomfort more than just trying to be reactionary, to like listen more, especially if you have privilege, I think is how an ally is best serving, right? They're sharing their power, supporting, centering, like Bridget said, just doing that work that's, behind the scenes and not glorious, but is really important.
We just have to, to add on to that, like not to like say racial justice is a separate thing from, climate justice. It is about like, how are they connected? And when you are advocating and following the leadership of Black and Indigenous peoples and the taking on their struggles, you are also fighting for climate justice. I think that people need to understand that these systems that are exploiting and extracting from the earth are the same that are also exploiting and extracting from our Black and brown communities. And so like even issues around like detention, right now, there's people within the detention center, migrants, who are being exposed to COVID and being exploited, right? Like that is also an environmental issue. They're in there without access to healthy food or access to healthcare. And in itself, prison is a toxic structure and leads to more and more inequity and hinders people's chances at a future, right? So I think it start to look at the intersections and start to really understand that these struggles are connected and they're not separate, and to really join arms with the people who are fighting for their communities.
One thing that I try to do is, for those of you who've been to Olympia, I know, Jill, you've been there a lot. It's very white, it's very male, and it's very wealthy. And so I try really hard to make sure that I am uplifting the next generation of leaders that might look more like me. Women, people of color, non-binary folks, folks that aren't normally there and don't normally have a seat at the table, because once there are interns, then they can become our session aides, and they can become our LAs, and they can work for organizations like yours. So I find it really important as a position of power and in the position to hire folks. If you're in a position to hire someone that's Black or brown, hire a woman, hire a trans person, hire someone who's non-binary, hire someone that doesn't look like you. And this is what I really get upset when people say, well, we really tried to make a search. We really tried to find a Black or brown person. Well, you didn't try very hard, right? And so if that is you and you're saying that and you've said that and you're watching this, please call me. I will help you reach out to the communities. Please call any one of these panelists. We can help you reach out and put those job offers in places that Black and brown and Indigenous folks can see them. I implore you, and I tell all the lobbyists, please hire a Black or brown woman next, because this building isn't going to change by changing just the legislature. It needs to be the staff, it needs to be the lobbyists, it needs to be everyone and everything. And then we can start, having folks that have experience to do the jobs, to lead these types of organizations that you all are running or leading. So I just wanted to say thank you for the work. I know how hard it is to lead as a person of color in spaces that were not built for us. So I just want to personally thank you for doing that, for being a leader, for being a trailblazer, and for speaking up, because they don't want us to do that. And when we keep doing it and we're not quiet, they must listen.
I love it. I'm getting goosebumps through my sweater.
Being motivated.
I love that too. I'm gonna use that. Although my name is not Mona. We did get a question, and I see that Bridget, you had responded, but the question is, how do you address people that might not believe you are Native, or does it matter to you? So Bridget, if you want to share your response, or also if anyone else wants to add to that.
I'll lead off. Yeah. So I get that a lot. The perception of me, for the most part, by non-natives is that I'm not Native, or it's not the first thing that comes to their mind. But that, there is a stereotype out there that natives look a certain way. And how you're Native is different between all the individuals. Like I said, we're really diverse. But it also, there's another, there have been periods of time, but great swaths of culling of Native children from their community, where Native children were taken from their tribe or put in boarding schools. And then there was the scoop of the 60s. There were specific times where the children were taken away from the tribes. And what we see now through ICWA and the foster care is a return to the tribe, where the tribe is seeking out people who have been estranged and bringing them home. So we're seeing a homecoming, and we're seeing a deeper, richer narrative of people who are Native or mixed Native, really reaching for understanding about historical trauma, cultural interruption. And so my personal story is that my mom's side, I'm Turtle Mountain Chippewa, Ojibwe from the Great Lakes area, North Dakota. I do know a bit of my language, but my grandfather spoke Michif. And that's the part I identify with the most, is because he used to swear at me, call me little Panichan, and he'd sing me songs in the mixed language. And there's a whole group of mixed people there that are the Métis in that area, and they fiddle and they clog, right? And so it's an interesting combination. There's a great book that I would encourage anybody who's really interested in the history of Indigenous people, just to get a sense of how diverse it is and how it's connected to our food and to our geography and to other kinds of influences. And that is The Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States by Roberta Ortiz. I'll post it in the chat. And it's hard to listen to, but it's great. And it's also got more recent policies that influence that narrative. And so we're moving towards, I don't mind the question. I've resolved who I am. Like, I know my language, I know my teachings, I have some. I don't have a name. I think natives who have a name are especially rich. But, there are a few teachings that I'm so lucky to have. I'm so lucky to be connected to my community. I'm so blessed to be part of the Canoe family. And to, that's a connection and a love for my people that is a richness that I wish other people could have, really, that is so important to us being interconnected. I'm always happy to share my story. I just don't always have the time to do it. So thank you for the question. I really appreciate it.
Actually, another question just popped up. So what are the biggest challenges that environmental justice advocates face when attempting to work or collaborate with government agencies that are responsible for environmental work? Ooh. Biggest challenges that we face as advocates. I feel like that's a loaded question.
I can share. Yeah, and I have tons of experience with that. And yeah, sometimes it feels like you're crazy when you're dealing with people who are not, who don't understand, or prioritize the community's kind of like priorities, or listen to us. Like, I think sometimes, people get really caught up in wanting things to be quantifiable or metrics, or like really, if they don't understand something, if they're not connected to that community, they may not value what you have to say. And so sometimes, it feels like our stories don't matter, right? Like, we're telling you like stop killing our people, or stop, stop polluting in our neighborhoods, stop burdening us. And yet, it feels like it's such a hard ask. And yet, they have different standards for other entities. Like they'll listen to lobbyists, or they'll listen to the industries more than their own constituents who are suffering. And so I think, like, one example is, like, we had to, as part of Front and Center, we had to develop this, health disparities map to map out how we were being oppressed by environmental injustices, and only then people were like, oh yeah, this area is really suffering under environmental injustice. We had to map it so that they can understand and basically have our stories be backed by maps when we've been telling them for years, right, what we've been dealing with. And so I think it really is going back to that last question, is how do we actually prioritize and understand, like, listen to the truths that frontline communities have been putting forward, and what their conditions are, and believing them, right? Like, and also valuing their stories, valuing their qualitative data that we have to, our expertise that we have to offer. There's a lot of solutions that work for the communities that have been working for years, that are ignored or devalued because it's not backed by, like, a scientist, or backed by a high paid professional or something. So
I that's exactly right. My fellow legislators like data, and I always try to share my lived experience. I've shared pretty deeply about my foreclosure, about what happened to me as a child. I mean, I've shared very deeply, and I do that because if I'm not going to do it, who is? Like, I have that lived experience, so I could stay silent about it, or I could share it. And I'm sharing it. And we have some really amazing people that are running for office right now, and they also have lived experience, and they're going to share it, and they're going to uplift. And there's a great question in the chat. Is Olympia ready for transformative change? Doesn't matter. It's coming. I mean, here's the thing. COVID, I mean, I am an optimist. My family came from India with $6, right? I have no choice but to be an optimist. And I will say this. We've always known, everyone on this call, known that our communities are most affected by climate change, discrimination, all of those things. Yet, as Jill mentioned, you talk to the legislators, where's the data? Where's the data? You know what? Just look, right? Like, Medina is not experiencing climate change, right? Medina or Bellevue or Kirkland, they're doing just fine. So let's look at the neighborhoods that aren't, right? Neighborhoods like mine, like Kent, where they bought a hotel to put COVID patients in. They didn't buy that in Medina or Magnolia. No, they bought it in Kent, right? And there's a reason for that, because those people don't usually care or complain because they don't have the resources or the knowledge. They're so busy. We are so busy trying to make ends meet that we can't care about climate justice because we're living in it, right? And so what I will say is this: COVID nobody can no longer deny that there is disparities between Black and brown and Indigenous people and white folks. No more. So when we go back to Olympia this year, guess what? They can't deny it anymore, Jill. They can take their data and just look at the news. That's the data that they need. And so when I go back to Olympia, if people thought I was bold last year or the year before, they ain't seen nothing yet, because now I know what I'm doing. I've been there for 2 years, and I will tell you what, I am no longer going to stay silent so that white people are comfortable. That ship has sailed. So be prepared, because I am going to be bolder. I'm going to be louder, and I'm going to be more in your face than I have been in the last 2 years. And, if you just check me out on, the Googles, there's a lot of stories about me about how bold I was a year ago. So I will say that my comfort is no longer going to be sacrificed for white comfort. Period. I'm done. Y'all should be done too. I know you are because you're bolder than I am. But I want to just say that when we go back to Olympia, the people who created these problems aren't at the table anymore. So when we elect all of these new folks, we are going to solve the problems. We are going to be at the table. And a few years ago in 2008, they said, well, just cut everything. Just cut all the service for the Black and brown and poor people. Just cut them. And then we saw what happened. We are in a crisis. So Senator Wynn, Senator Emily Randall, all of the other Black and brown legislators know that we cannot cut our services for our communities. And in fact, we need to cut the corporate greed. That's where we're going to cut. And we're going to close up all those loopholes. And we're going to make sure that our communities prosper, that have been on the sidelines for far too long. So if you want to know what's going to change in Olympia, vote.
And when we're talking about cuts, I wanted to add, in just this year alone, we have an administration and an EPA that has rolled back on, I think, over 100 different environmental regulations and laws that are meant to protect our waters, our communities from toxins and pollutants from industry, right? And so, it definitely does matter who it is that's representing us. It's important that they mirror the communities and our experiences, right?
And I just want to say one quick thing. I'm not here tonight as a senator. I'm here as Mona Das. There's certain things I'm allowed to talk about as a senator or not. So tonight, I just want to preface that all my statements are me as a community member, not as my elected position.
Thank you. So there is another question that just popped up for me. So this is for the Youth Corps. If Leilani and Kelsey are there, as young people doing organizing work around environmental justice, do you feel like leaders and community members take you seriously?
Yeah, that's something I was going to mention for the previous question. Being youth and mainly people of color youth, thankfully I haven't experienced it, but I know from stories that they are taken as a joke, not serious. They're like, you don't know anything. You're not in the real world. I was once said that like 4 years ago during the elections as well. And I believe not many people believe youth are as educated as because they're older, they have gone to college or whatnot. So that's what from my perspective. Not a lot of people believe in us, but that's one of the missions of the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps, to like create advocates in order to advocate for themselves when others couldn't. So that we can advocate for our parents and those in need as well.
We believe in you. That's why you are a Youth Award recipient. And, I really do feel like if, one of the wonderful things that have come out of this sort of moment of crisis is the way in which young people have really led the way. Really being brave and having this courage, to really fight for the land and the waters that they'll be inheriting, and so I believe in you. I think you're amazing. So
Can I add something on real quick?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Sorry. I just wanted to touch upon being a young organizer. And now I'm 24, so I'm getting out of the youth zone, but I'm still youngish. But I've noticed what really helps us is when we like center our sacrifice, right? Like I should not have had to spend the last 5 years of my youth organizing to like fight for like a livable future, right? Nor should Leilani or Kelsey. And I think we have to really center that, right? Of like, we shouldn't be here, but we have to be. Therefore, like the people in power need to change, right? Like you got to stop killing us. You got to stop undermining us. Like I should not have to be spending my youth, right? Like doing work that is so draining because just to make sure like the planet survives. And I think I try to center that when I give like testimony to city council and in front of folks and like whatnot. Like it is BS that I'm here, right? Like I'm glad that I'm here and I'm glad that I'm giving help, but I shouldn't have to, right? I think we have to really like honor and center ourselves in that too. Like the adults didn't figure it out, so like us youngins gotta, and like that's just the way it is, right? But we got to do it. And so I think that's something I always want to like hold with us and keep with us. And like I remind, right, like my hub coordinator for Sunrise Scum, our hub coordinators are 14, 17, and 19, right? Like they're leading the charge. And I always have to remind them, like, you need to remind folks, like, you should not be doing this work, but you are, and that matters.
That's so cool. Fire in the belly.
Exactly.
Mhm. Awesome.
Love it. We have about 2 minutes left. This has been awesome. I wish we had another hour. I feel like we could just keep on going. But as we're closing out, I just want to ask all of you, you know, what's the best way to keep track of the work that you're doing? You know, is there a website? You know, can people find you on socials? Maybe Kelsey and Leilani, if you want to start it off, you know, what's the best way to find out what the Duwamish Youth Corps is up to, and how can they reach you folks?
We have, or like DRCC has a website, and there's a lot of information there as well. And Carmen Martinez, Paulina Lopez on Facebook. They post like every work that we do. There's tons of pictures of us. There's also the DRCC Facebook page and Instagram page. I will try and add those. I don't have them on hand, but yeah.
Awesome. 1 minute left. Who wants to go? Jill, Got Green.
Oh, yeah, you can reach us on our website, www.gotgreenseattle.org, or Facebook and IG is actually more updated than our Facebook or than our webpage. And you can sign up for emails, I guess. But yeah.
Bridget.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So we do have Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. I would say Facebook has the most information about what we're up to currently, events, call outs, things you can climb onto. Our Instagram following is actually pretty big. It's quadrupled in the last year, which just shows how awesome and hot our team is, doing incredible stuff. But our website was just updated. I was just looking at it, and my WISE Action program is not on there right now. I'm like, how did that get erased? But some of the other cool things we do, like the indigenous ecology and foods, land restoration work, our climate justice cohort, our youth, cultural arts and tech, the fiscal sponsorship program. We do have a grant making program. We're about to launch some artist grants specific to King County, but our service area is throughout the Pacific Northwest. We do have an allyship training program if people are interested in that. And then we have some special initiatives, one of which is our Cedar Rising Coalition that is specific to King County and the I-5 corridor that addresses missing and murdered Indigenous people. And then we are launching a land conservancy to get Indigenous groups and brown and blue and purple and every color, you know, to get people connected to the land, to, you know, that's super important. And there's a number of ways to do that. So I think, you know, and we're just phasing out our census work, but kind of seeing how that will evolve our engagement work, which is really about weaving together a basket of badasses, kind of like you've done tonight. So
Thank you, Bridget. And Marquise, what's the best way to get in touch with you and the work that you're up to?
Yeah.
And we are going over a little bit. Thank you for those of you that are still with us.
Yeah, so you can reach us at CHB. I think on Twitter we're CHB Tacoma. On Instagram we're Citizens for Healthy Bay. Also, full disclaimer, I think we're on the process of changing Citizens, so we know it. You don't have to call it out. We know it. There's some loadedness to that term, but that's what we're called for now. And for Citizens for Healthy Bay, we have a coalition called the Protect the Tacoma Tide Floods Coalition. So if you're an advocacy org and you want to help us reduce all the polluting industries in the Tacoma Tide Floods right now, they keep expanding behind our backs, even though we have some fossil fuel moratoriums that aren't working, cough, cough. You can join our coalition. We have an Enviro News listserv that's on our website if that's of interest to you, and we do action alerts there. You can follow us on Instagram at Citizens for Healthy Bay. You can see my cute graphics because I love graphic design. And then Sunrise is Sunrise_Tacoma on Instagram, Sunrise Tacoma on Twitter, and Sunrise Tacoma on Facebook. I would drop that all in the chat, but I'm on my iPad, so when I have to type like this, so maybe I'll take myself off the video and type it in there.
Awesome. And Senator Doss.
I'm easy to find. Just Google me. I will tell you I'm 49, so Facebook is my preferred socials because I'm old. But I'm on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. You can sign up for our newsletter and all that. So thanks for having us.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And remember, everyone, get out there, vote, have a lovely evening, and take care. Be well.
Take care, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go youth. Woo! You're our
Mona.
future.
This is a Puget Sound Keeper presentation.